Love me now while we're alive, it's the best thing we can do. We'll have no time upon cloud nine, so heaven on earth will have to do. Cause I made a deal with the devil, and when I die, I'm going straight to hell.
For the billions of followers of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, there is a clear understanding of how things came into existence.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
For the three Abrahamic faiths, there are doctrinal differences on this and other topics about how and when the end of the world will occur. Throughout the New Testament of the Bible, Tanakh, and Quran, there are numerous verses that give us a glimpse into what happens when God decides that it is time to end creation. Throughout this, I will be exploring the ideas present and the evolution of those ideas from the Tanakh books of Numbers, Daniel, Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Joel, and Zechariah, to the New Testament books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Revelation. In addition, I will examine the beliefs held by both the Sunni and Shiite branches of Islam. Before I can begin to examine the different beliefs presented in the Abrahamic religions about the end of the world, I must first provide a little background. What I will be addressing, the end of the world, is a field of study called eschatology. Eschatology comes from the Greek word eschatos and means last. It is a field of study that not only addresses the end of the world, but more broadly addresses the ultimate end of all things, including what happens to an individual when they die. There are two branches to this field of study, with one creating a macroscopic or cosmic explanation for what happens at the end, and a view that explains what happens to you as an individual. For this, I will be focusing more on what happens on a macroscopic scale at the end. As one last note, this field of study is important from a religious standpoint because it helps people to understand and cope with death and the ultimate place in creation. The Tanakh, also known as the Old Testament to Christians, is composed of 39 books divided into three parts: the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. From reading the books of the Tanakh and the verses contained within, we can clearly see that the Jewish faith has a very different view of the end of the world compared to its theological descendant Christianity. Judaism focuses more on the here and now and does not have much to say about what awaits when you die. It would appear early on that the belief was that everyone who died ended up in Shiloh, the grave or pit, as a sort of universal receptacle for the dead prior to moving on. This place is also known as Gehinnom and is similar to the Catholic view of purgatory. Several verses address what Sheol and what happens to the dead there. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6, power to send people down to Sheol and raise them back up. In Job chapter 10, verses 21 and 22, we are told by Job,
"Nay, take comfort a little, before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land of darkness as darkness itself, and of the shadow of death without any order, and where the light is as darkness."
While some may go there to be punished, it does not appear to be a place of eternal punishment. It is more of a place for one to be purified. In addition, one final verse on the subject, Job chapter 30, verse 23, states the universalness of Sheol as a place.
For I knew that you would return me to death and to the meeting place of all living.
Very few people go directly from the earth to the temporary paradise that is known as Gan Eden. This translates as Garden of Eden, but this is not the same garden as mentioned in Genesis. The Gan Eden is a place of spiritual perfection. One source states that you cannot truly understand what it is like, just like a blind person cannot truly understand what color is. One view on what this paradise is like, written by two rabbis, is that in this paradise, you experience all the happiness that you caused here on earth. Prior to this experience of paradise, one must face the demons that they create in life. As mentioned previously, Gehinnom is equivalent of Catholic purgatory, and it is here that one must face the evil that they did in life. When one is dead, they can experience the true reality of what their life was without any earthly limitations. The recently deceased is taken before a heavenly court for its, quote, judgment and accounting. But the heavenly court only does the accounting and leaves the judgment up to the deceased. According to Rabbi Shlomo Yafi, because we are freed from the earthly limits of our human bodies, we can then see godliness and experience our lives for what they truly were. This can either give one a taste of the paradise that is the Gan Eden for seeing the good we caused, or it can cause the extreme pain of Gehinnom, This pain or pleasure is caused by the truth, which hurts,
You can't handle the truth!
but it also cleanses and heals. Once cleansed of the sins of the flesh, the soul is then able to move on to the Gan Eden and, quote, bask in the divine radiance emitted by godliness. What is more interesting is that according to the rabbi who wrote the piece, the most that one spends in Gehinnom is 12 months because the evil we cause in life is shallow and superficial compared to the good. Having said that, I must note that there is some debate as to what happens after the 12-month period for a truly wicked life. Some say that the soul is simply destroyed, while others feel that the soul continues to exist in a state of remorse. The Gan Eden, however, is not the final resting place. Eventually the dead will be resurrected on earth, but before that time, for the Jewish people known as, quote, the end of the days must occur. The title End of Days comes from Numbers 24:14, which states,
And now behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days.
During this time period, the religious figure known as the Moshiach, Messiah in English, will appear on earth. The Moshiach, which means anointed one, is a title reserved for the Jewish leader who will appear at the end of days and who will redeem the nation of Israel before the eyes of God. The Moshiach will be a direct descendant from the line of David and will rebuild the Temple of Solomon. In addition, he will gather all the Jews from all over the world and bring them back to Israel. All the nations of the world will recognize the Moshiach and will accept his dominion over the entire world. During the rule of the Moshiach, there will be world peace with no more wars or famine, and, in general, a high standard of living. God will finally have an abode on the earth. The Jewish view of the end of the world is almost utopian in nature, although the Rabbi Nissan Dubov does not like the use of the utopian to describe the coming of the Moshiach. According to the rabbi, quote, Judaism fervently believes that with the correct leadership, humankind can and will change. The leadership quality of Moshiach means that through his dynamic personality and example, coupled with manifest humility, he will inspire all people to strive for good, end quote. He believes that as humans we have the capability to do great good with the level of technology that we have right now, and once the Moshiach appears, we will have the social and political will to change the world for the better. In addition, some followers of Judaism feel that by doing godly deeds, the return of the Moshiach can be hastened along. The Battle of Gog and Magog will be fought before the return of the Moshiach. It will be a period of turmoil, and Elijah will return to announce the arrival of the Moshiach. Once the Moshiach has gained rule of the world, these troubles will disappear, and the Olam Haba, world to come, will be established for the righteous of the world. At this point, the resurrection of the dead will occur. There does seem to be some dispute about what will happen to the wicked during this time. Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2 states,
And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame.
It's not exactly clear if this is a punishment or what exactly happens to those that sleep and then awaken to eternal shame. Some of the imagery that provides some more detail on the Jewish belief is quite vivid. For example, from Daniel chapter 2, we get a very interesting dream from King Nebuchadnezzar that illustrates the rise and fall of empires before the end of days. Each of the empires will be weaker than the prior. The kingdom of God that will appear on the earth will utterly destroy the other empires and leave no trace of them or their people on the earth. The four empires represented in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream have been taken to mean the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire began by Cyrus the Great, the Greco-Macedonian Empire established by Alexander the Great, and finally, the Roman Empire. The majority of allegorical imagery found in the Old Testament concerning the end of the world is found in the book of Daniel. In chapter 7, Daniel has a vision of four winds blowing over the, quote, great sea, and out of the sea come four very bizarre creatures. Each beast represents a different kingdom on earth, and the fourth and last beast is the most terrifying. It has 10 horns on its head, teeth of iron, and 3 of the horns have human eyes on them. These also represent the 4 M's as previously stated. In addition, this last beast has an arrogant mouth. This last kingdom will, quote, speak words against the Most High, and he will oppress the high holy ones, and he will think to change the times and the law.
I am the law!
Chapter 8 of Daniel informs of the same thing, only using 2 animals, a ram and a he-goat, to represent the same vision. In the book of Zechariah, we see much of the same imagery from Revelation being used, including the imagery of 4 horses drawing chariots. The vivid imagery of many of the Old Testament verses about the end stand in stark contrast to the fairly normal view that Jews hold about the end of the world. It would seem that the previously stated verses would belong more to the even more bizarre Christian apocalypse. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek term apokalypsis, which implies an unveiling of events or a disclosure of truth. In general, the term apocalypse refers to a group of writings that flourished between 200 BCE and 100 CE. Having said that, it must be noted that there are apocalyptic stories dating back to ancient Babylon and Persia. The books of the New Testament that cover the Christian apocalypse include Matthew, Mark, Luke, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Revelation. The books of the New Testament use even more highly symbolic symbols in order to tell the followers of Christianity what the end of the world will be like. The first chapter of the New Testament that tells us what the end will be like occurs in Matthew 24, and it is Jesus himself who tells his followers what it will be like. Similar to Judaism, there will be rumors of wars and nations going against nations. There will be many calamities such as famine, pestilence, and earthquakes in many corners of the world. False prophets will arise and successfully convince many other people that they have come in the name of Christ.
Now you listen here. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Now go away.
In contrast to this, the quote, true gospel will be preached throughout the land. The chapter seems to indicate that those in Israel will be forced to flee and that there will not be any time for them to even go inside and pack their things for the trip. There is a bit of a problem during the sermon as Jesus in verse 34 states, quote, Verily
I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and
Clearly more than a generation has passed since this line was stated. However, Jesus does state 2 verses later that not even he knows when the events of the end will pass. The chapter ends by Jesus stating that he will return when people least expect it, and there will be gnashing of teeth.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
The next book, Mark, covers much of the same information that Matthew does. This would make sense since all 4 of the Gospels tell the same story and they should contain the same information. It is interesting to note that Jesus does tell his disciples in chapter 13 that the Temple of Jerusalem will be completely destroyed before the end of the world. Jesus continues to tell them that false prophets will arise and that there will be wars and rumors of war that will herald the end. Reading through the chapter, the most stunning description of the end is, quote, The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. It is very vivid, and it could be seen, in modern terms, as meteorites and an eclipse of the sun. Luke tells us that people will be shaken by all the events going on. Most interesting about this book is the reference made in chapter 22, verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. While Luke was most likely Jewish, it is interesting to note his attitude towards the Gentiles that he and the other Jewish apostles would be preaching to. Based on this verse, you would assume that Luke probably views Gentiles as defilers. Again, this is a prophecy that could be said to have been fulfilled, but not as the speaker said. Jerusalem has been returned to the Jews, but there are clearly more Gentiles in the world than Jews. Thessalonians is more hopeful than the previous books and is not nearly as violent. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 16 to 17 tells the followers that when Jesus reappears, those that died in his name will rise first, and those that are still living will be swept up to heaven. This has been tied to the idea of the rapture. In addition, a previous verse warns people that the end will come when the world seems to be at peace and that the return of Jesus will, quote, come like a thief in the night. 2 Thessalonians also attempts to comfort the followers of Jesus being persecuted at the time. Paul wrote, quote, Seeing it is a righteous thing with God to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you. This book is violent unlike the previous Thessalonians, and actually says those that do not believe will be punished with everlasting destruction. 2 Thessalonians also repeats the motif of false prophets arising and deceiving many people. We then finally reach the book of Revelation of St. John the Divine, which, fittingly, is the final book of the Bible. It is full of strong imagery and combines many of the elements repeated throughout the Tanakh and the New Testament. The first part of the book deals with 7 letters being sent to 7 different Christian churches at the time and outline their flaws and what they need to fix. In the beginning, each church is represented by 7 stars, angels, and candlesticks. Number 7 is repeated quite often throughout this book. John is then taken up to heaven and is greeted by four beasts covered in eyes sitting before the throne of God. After they praise God, Jesus appears and takes a scroll with 7 seals and begins to open the scroll. The first 4 seals release what are known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, each representing conquest, war, famine, and death. They are given the power to kill a fourth of the earth. The next 3 seals unleash an earthquake, and the sun goes black, and the moon becomes red like blood. Prior to breaking the 7th seal, an angel travels to the earth, marking the servants of God to protect them against the things that are to come. And once the seal is broken, there is silence in heaven. This then leads to 7 trumpets, and then finally 7 bowls of God's wrath being poured out onto the people of the earth. Each one unleashes horrible disasters, including blacking out the sun and the stars falling to the earth. It continues until Jesus returns to earth, slaughtering those that oppose him by a, quote, sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. The world shall be judged, and the wicked, along with the beasts that deceive the world to go against God, will be tossed into the lake of fire. Satan will be bound in chains, but after 1,000 years will be unleashed, and he will wage a final war against God. He will be ultimately defeated, and he and his army will be cast into a lake of fire, and the old world will pass away, and a new Jerusalem shall descend from heaven, and paradise will be on earth. The Christian apocalypse is much more violent than the Jewish end of days, and literature reflects that. It is full of dramatic, symbolic images that talk of war and the persecution of the followers of God. What is interesting is that there are 4 traditional views of the apocalypse. The preterist view sees Revelation as predicting the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, or that predicts the fall of the Roman Empire. This view states that the global destruction prophecies are limited only to Jerusalem or the Roman Empire. The second view, called historicist view, attempts to take the prophecies in Revelation and apply them to the history of the Western Church. This makes Jesus' return seem very imminent. Third view, futurist, can be divided into 2 parts that disagree on whether Revelation should be taken literally or figurative. Dispensational futurists see Revelation as being literally true, and that the events of the end will occur in the exact order as they are described in the book. Modified futurists do not take the visions literally, and do not hold them to be the exact chronological events leading up to the end. They reject the idea of a rapture that many of the dispensationalists accept. The final view, idealist, sees Revelation as a symbolic representation of the battle between good and evil. As stated prior, Revelation and the Apocalypse is quite different when compared to the end of days. While it shares the same view of wars occurring and false prophets appearing, it also ends in the eternal suffering of those that go against God. While Judaism kind of leaves it open to what happens to those that are wicked, Christianity goes for the pain and states they will be punished. In the next section, I will address the end of the world views of Islam. For the billion or so Muslims around the world, the end of the world is known as Al-Qiyam, which can be translated to mean the resurrection. Similar to Christianity and Judaism, there are many verses throughout the Quran that tell followers of Islam about what the resurrection will be about. The section of the Quran called Al-Azab, the clans or combined forces, in verse 63 states,
يسألك الناس عن الساعة قل إنما علمها عند الله وما يدريك لعل الساعة تكون قريبا.
It is interesting to see that all 3 of the Abrahamic faiths take a view that no one can truly know when the end will come. Al-Isra, the night journey, tells us in verse 49 to 51 that even if the bones have been destroyed, the person will still be resurrected. What is different from both Judaism and Christianity is that it is indicated that the dead will not have realized just how much time has elapsed since their death. The verse reads, "On the day when he will call you, and you will answer his call with words of his praise and obedience, and you will think that you have stayed in this world but a little while." One last belief is that those that worship false gods will be punished. Quote, "Whosoever of the sects disbelieveth therein, the fire is his promised place." Like the other 2 Abrahamic religions, Islam has many signs that point to the coming end. There will be those that do not believe that the end is coming. And, quote, "And warn thou them of the day of sighing, when the affairs shall have been detected while yet they are in negligence and are not believing." Verses that talks about the end is found again in Al-Isra. Quote, "And we said unto the children of Israel after him, Dwell in the land, but when the promise of the hereafter cometh to pass, we shall bring you as a crowd gathered out of various nations. If one had a preconceived notion about Muslims hating Jews, this would show that the belief is incorrect. In Islam, there is a false Messiah figure found in the Hadiths, which are the sayings of the prophets. He is known as the Dajjal, and there are vivid descriptions of how he will act and what he will look like. He will not be able to enter Medina and will perform miracles similar to Jesus raising the dead. He will kill a man, often stated by cutting him in half, and then raise the man back from the dead. Unfortunately for the Dajjal, this will have the opposite effect of what he wants, and the man he raises will believe even more so that he is the Dajjal will try to kill the man again, but he will fail. The Dajjal only has one eye, and according to one hadith, the end will not come until 30 Dajjals appear and proclaim that they are Allah. In the end, he will be slain by Isa, Christians, as Jesus. Yes, for the billion-plus Muslims around the world, the end is marked by the return of Jesus to the earth. The difference between Shiite and Sunni Muslims is whether Jesus will descend along with the Mahdi or alone. The Mahdi is a religious figure that will prepare the world for the eventual rule by Jesus. He could almost be seen as a Messiah figure, as he is to make things better before the end. Following the return of Jesus to the earth, the resurrection and judgment of all people of the world can begin. The archangel Israfil will sound a horn that will raise the dead from the grave. At this point, the righteous and the damned will be separated, and all will stand before Allah and be judged. Al-Zalzala, the earthquake, states, quote, "Then whosoever has worked good of an atom's weight shall see it, and whosoever has worked ill of an atom's weight shall see it." This means that even the smallest act of good or evil will be ignored when you are judged. This is a moment of comfort for those that are not Muslim but do good deeds. For those that are righteous and of the other Abrahamic faiths, they will not be punished. Quote, "Verily, those who believe, and those who are Jew and Christian, and Sabians, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, and do righteous and good deeds, shall have their reward with their Lord. On them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. Those that are wicked will be punished and be sent to the Islamic version of hell, a place described as the crushing fire. The just will be rewarded with a paradise." As I have shown, the eschatology of the Abrahamic beliefs are interesting and show a clear emphasis on reward and punishment. All three emphasize that near the end there will be conflicts and much suffering. All three view that this suffering will end because of the return of a Messiah figure that will cleanse the world of evil and rule righteously. Three holy books are full of prophecies and interesting visions foretelling the end of all. In the end, all three attempt to explain the great mystery of what will happen at the end of the world and to those that have died.
It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. That's where it starts with an earthquake, birds, snakes, and aeroplanes. Lenny Bruce is not afraid. I have a hurricane, listen to yourself, turn worlds at its own needs. Let me sing your own hits, speed it up and not speed.